like to talk with you, like I said, about something personal for me. I'm going to start out telling you about my 9-year-old godson, TJ. He once told me he doesn't trust God. He went on to tell the story of how he was attacked by bullies and how they kicked him, how they beat him, how they humiliated him. He said that he called on God for help, and God did not help him. Where was God when I needed him, he said. And I could hear the pain in his voice, as if he was living it at that very moment. Where was God? Was God powerless to help him? Was God out to lunch, or on vacation, or maybe taking a nap? Or was God watching and getting pleasure from the beating that TJ was taking? Or had God simply abandoned him and not found him worthy of helping him? Or just simply, even worse, did God not care? Can you feel, TJ? I know I can, because I've had some times in my life where I've kind of felt that way. Where was God when I needed God? And I'm going to talk with you about that in a little bit. But first, I'd like to give you our anchor scripture, which comes from Psalms 139, verses 7 through 10. It reads, "Whither shall I go from thy spirit? Or whither shall I flee from thy presence? If I ascend into heaven, thou art there. If I descend into Sheol, behold, thou art there also. If I lift my wings up like those of an eagle, bear with me for a second, and in the uttermost parts of the sea, even there also shall thy hand lead me, and thy right hand shall hold me." Have you had a time in your life, an experience, where it seemed that no matter what you did, no matter how much you prayed, that it didn't seem to make a difference? That the very thing that you wanted so badly, it just didn't seem to happen? Or maybe it was the thing that you didn't want to happen, that it did. You did your spiritual work, and nothing seemed to help. Nothing seemed to make it better. Now, maybe you were praying for the healing of a loved one, and that loved one transitioned anyway. Or maybe the healing that you were praying for was your own, and you didn't get any better. Maybe it was to save you from the foreclosure of your home, and the foreclosure happened anyway. Maybe it was for a relationship to stay together and not break up, but instead the relationship dissolved anyway. What was your expectation? Did you expect that God was going to come through for you? That somehow that God was going to fix this for you? But instead it didn't? How did it make you feel? For me personally, I can remember a time when Reverend Sharon, actually it was before we got married, that Reverend Sharon was suffering from a condition called endometriosis. Now, men, you don't have to worry about getting this, because this is very female specific. But I will tell you, if you're involved with someone and you know someone that has it, it can be a devastating ailment. You see, what happens is, endometriosis is a condition where the lining of the uterus somehow gets outside of the uterus and travels to other parts of the body. Now, that lining is what fills up with blood with the expectation that the woman will become pregnant. So it creates this nice bed for the fertilized egg to attach to draw nutrients from. And when that doesn't happen, once a month, the system drains out and the woman has her monthly cycle. So now when this tissue gets outside of the womb, a woman may experience excessive cramping, excessive pain, excessive bleeding. And the symptoms may begin actually a few days before the cycle begins and last for a few days afterwards. In severe cases, the pain and the cramping can be so bad that only the most powerful prescription painkillers can help. Sometimes the symptoms even happen in the middle of the month when they shouldn't. And in Reverend Sharon's case, sometime turned into all the time. It got to the point where the symptoms got so bad that she could not work. And 6 months before we were supposed to get married, she had to stop working. So here we are. At that time, we're going to Reverend Ike's church to United Palace. And if you remember Reverend Ike, probably the thing that you remember about Reverend Ike is that he was a prosperity minister. But what might not be as evident is that he also had a very strong healing ministry. In fact, that's how Reverend Sharon came to Reverend Ike's church, and she was the one that introduced me to him. And at that point, when we were engaged to be married, we had been involved with the ministerial school there for a year or two. So we were into this thing where we were applying truth in our lives. And we were doing our visualizations, our affirmations, our prayers, our prayer treatments for Reverend Sharon's healing. And it did not happen. 2 weeks after we got married, Reverend Sharon was in the hospital having major exploratory surgery on her abdomen for the doctors to see exactly what was going on. 3 or 4 surgeries later, about 2 years later, Reverend Sharon had to have a hysterectomy, and one of her ovaries was removed. A couple of months later, she went back, and the last one was removed. And I can remember being at the doctor's office. He was a wonderful man, Dr. Sweeney. And Reverend Sharon saying to him, "Is there any way that my eggs can be taken and be frozen, that maybe later on, that we may be able to have children?" Because you see, at that point, it was still important to her that she be able to give me children. And this was during the 80s, and a time when the technology just simply did not exist. It just wasn't there to be able to make it happen. And I remember him saying no, that he was sorry. We left the office. His office was on East 63rd Street, I believe, or East 65th, on the east side of Manhattan. And I can remember everything just hitting me, bam, like a ton of bricks. And I just broke out into tears. Because the finality of everything that was happening, all the pressure of everything that was happening over those few years of struggling, of fighting, of being in the hospital, of going from doctor to doctor looking for a cure, for help. It just hit me at that moment. You see, I didn't mind so much that we wouldn't be able to have our own children. That wasn't so important to me because I had Reverend Sharon. But it was just the idea of that loss, that not being able to do something that was a possibility that hit me. So at that point, I began to question God. I began to question what it was that I was being taught and whether this truth stuff really worked. And around that same time, the ministers that married us, they were from Tennessee. We met them at the palace. The palace was undergoing some severe financial issues, and Reverend Ike had let go of almost all of his ministers. So they had gone out on their own to try to start their own church, and it fizzled. And these were people who had been involved in truth for more than 20, 25 years. And I'm like, wow, this didn't even work for them. This truth stuff, what's going on? It doesn't work. And my attitude got to be very cynical, where I kind of took a step back, and I know this is something that a speaker's not supposed to do, but I did this to God. And for the next 30 years, I did not go to church. I did not do anything of faith that would be praying or anything that really would put me in a position to put my trust in God. Because I felt like that God had let me go, so I let God go. God had let me down, so I let God go. And it wasn't until we found Hillside that I got back on my path and started to find answers when we re-enrolled in the ministry program there to complete what we had started more than 30 years ago. So what I'd like to talk with you today, I'd like to share some insights with you, because if you've had that experience where you've asked, where is God? Why is God not helping me? Perhaps I can give you some truth to work with. The thing is that for most of us, we don't understand God, we don't understand faith, and we don't understand our relationship with God and with faith. Now, when I say the word God, what comes to mind for you? Is it a huge man with a long white beard living in the sky? A man who looks down on us and judges us? A man who can, if he is pleased with us, help us? And if he is not, bring us misery, plagues, and disasters? Do you think of a person who can get angry, be vindictive, or someone who we can plead with and cajole with and maybe persuade him to do something different? Well, if you feel that way, don't feel so badly, because that's really how the Bible presents God to us, particularly in the Old Testament. You see, the ancient Semitic people, they really created God in the image of man. They created him as an emotional person, a ruler, because that was what they understood. That's what made sense to them. And they believed that God was responsible for every single thing that happened in their lives and in the lives of everyone. In fact, if you read Genesis 32, chapter 30, verse 2, where Jacob is talking to Rachel, the woman that he loved so much, she just couldn't stand it that she couldn't have children and said, "You've got to do something." And Jacob responded to her, "Am I in the place of God, who has kept you from having children?" They believed that God was responsible for everything. So if God was responsible for everything that happens to us, then God should be able to stop those bad things from happening to us, right? I mean, and that was part of my problem. I didn't believe that God was this huge man up in the sky. And I didn't believe that God would be vindictive. But I did believe that God could intervene and could fix whatever it was that was wrong with me or with anybody else. So for many of us, we have this description of an arbitrary God who can do all things without question. And we accept it without questioning things because what? We're taught you don't question God and you don't question the Word of God. But in Spirit Family, I'm going to tell you, everything that you read in that Bible, everything that you hear, even the things that I say, you should regard it critically. You should ask yourself, with what I know of the ancient Semitic people, of what I know of the culture, is what I'm reading and hearing making sense? Does it make sense for me to take this thing that I'm reading literally? Or is there something more behind it that I need to be looking at that will give me a proper perspective on how this applies to me? So now then, if God is not a man, what is God? Well, I'll take that one from the Bible, that God is spirit. And that if we're going to worship God, we must worship God in spirit and in truth. That means that God is universal, that God is everywhere present, that God is all power. And these are the pillars, or one of the pillars, of New Thought. So here's the thing. Regardless of what I do, if I turn my back on God, God will never leave me. God will never forsake me. God will never desert me. So then if that's the problem, or rather if that's the truth, then what's the problem and what happened in my own case? The problem is that I deserted God. You see, with the experience, that experience of Reverend Sharon having to have the operations and the illness and everything, I took it one way, but it did something completely different for her. Instead of weakening her faith, it strengthened her faith. In fact, she was glad to get rid of that pain. She was glad to not have that cramping and all of that stuff. She was glad and she never looked back. And ladies, I think you might be able to understand this because she didn't have to look forward to her friend coming to visit every month and wreaking havoc in her life. Okay? So she was glad to get rid of it. But it had the opposite effect on me. So the question is why? Why is it that things didn't work out for me, but they seemed to work out so well for her? So now we need to understand also that God is principle, and that if we're having different experiences, it depends on how well that we're applying principle in our lives. Because what God does for one, God can and will do for everybody if everybody is aligned properly with their thoughts and their beliefs with God. In Acts 10:34, Peter tells us, "Of a truth I perceive that a God is not a respecter of persons." This means that God is not arbitrary. God cannot be bargained with. God will not change his mind. Now, it may sound as if we're doomed to circumstances, to whatever there are, but that couldn't be further from the truth. It's not that God is not concerned with our circumstances. God does not create our circumstances. It's we who create our circumstances through our thoughts, through our words, and through our beliefs. And what God does as principle is that God mirrors those images, those thoughts, and those beliefs back to us. So here's the thing. If you're seeing something in your life that you don't like, if you're seeing something that you don't care for, don't ask God to change it. You need to go inside of you to the Christ that dwells in you and have a talk with that Christ, to the God within, and have a change in yourself. And then your circumstances will change. What we need to do is stop asking God to do something for us, and we need to start doing and being the truth that we need to be, the truth that we want to experience. So here are a few scriptures about faith, and many of these you've heard. Faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. That's Hebrews 11:1. We walk by faith, not by sight. 2 Corinthians 5:7. For the body without the spirit is dead, so faith without works is dead. And that's James 2:26. So here's the thing about faith. A lot of people think that they can lose their faith, or that they need to have more faith, or that their faith can be taken away from them, or they can gain their faith. And nothing can be further from the truth. You see, faith is a part of our spiritual DNA. It's an attribute of who we are and what we are as spiritual beings. In fact, you are faith because you are a spiritual being made in the image and likeness of God, and God is faith. Therefore, so are you. So you can't lose your faith. You can't get any more faith. You've got all the faith that you're ever going to need. You're not going to get any more. Now, the thing is that your faith is like a muscle. So when we talk about somebody losing their faith or not having faith, it's not that they don't have faith. It's that they're not exercising faith, that their faith has become weak and it becomes dormant. So what we need to do is make sure that we're acting in ways that strengthen our faith. Now, another thing that people don't seem to understand is they think that faith and belief are the same thing, and they're not. Now, the two are very strongly connected. They're kind of like this. But belief and faith are two different things. And if you look in the dictionary will tell you that faith is a very strong belief. It's a conviction. Let me show you what the difference is. Until about 500 years ago, people believed. In fact, they were convinced that the world was flat, and that if you sailed too far, you'd reach the edge and you'd fall off. They believed it so strongly that if you talked about anything different, they considered it blasphemy, and you might be burned at the stake. But it wasn't true. It was error thinking. So beliefs are what we think, how we perceive the world. They're the thoughts and the feelings that we have collected from our environment, from our experiences, from those people around us. Belief is not faith, but belief is critical to using faith, because belief activates your faith. And by the same token, if it can activate your faith, it can limit your faith. So the things that we believe, we need to be careful about what we believe, what we accept. And we need to stop using these words interchangeably, at least when we're talking about utilizing our faith and we're talking about it in a spiritual way. Now, the thing is that faith is living. Faith is active. Faith is a part of who we are. And that's why that scripture, James 2:26, is so important. That faith without works is dead. Because if you're not doing anything, you're not exercising your faith. And see, in my case, I wasn't doing anything with the faith I had. My belief was erroneous that I thought that God should be doing something for Minister Sharon. And because my beliefs, my expectations were not met, I turned my back on God. But see, God was right there. God was still there with me, seeing me through all the different things that I went through, whether I consciously realized it or not. You see, it's not that I didn't believe in God anymore. It's not that I didn't even believe in new thought. I just thought for some reason it wasn't working for me. And I wasn't going to put my trust and my so-called faith in it because I didn't want to be let down and hurt. And that's the problem with many of us. We're not willing. We're not willing to follow truth, to follow God, to follow faith wherever it is it takes us. And so we take these detours that take us off into places that perhaps we don't need to go, but we have to go because it's what our souls need for our personal growth and development. If your faith is not taking you where you want to go, don't try to change your faith because you can't. Change your beliefs. And then when you change your beliefs, your faith will take you to where you need to be. If your faith is not taking you to where you want to be, change your beliefs. And when you change your beliefs, your faith will take you to where you want to go. And so it is. All right, so let's take a look at our relationships because, we've got this relationship with God, and that's something that especially traditional Christians talk about. I've got this relationship with God. I've got a personal relationship with Jesus. And, it's important that we understand our relationship with God. And this is not to try to put anybody else's beliefs down, because if something's working for you, work it. And when people talk about having a personal relationship with God or with Jesus, their working principle is just that their belief system brings them to whatever it is that they believe in a little bit differently. But underneath it, again, it's like driving a car. It doesn't matter whether you're driving a Hyundai, a Toyota, or a Mercedes. The principle is the same. You step on that gas and the car is going to go. The vehicle that you ride in will get you there differently, but they all will get you to where you want to go. So now here's the thing about your relationship with God, and you may be a bit shocked to hear this. But when you were created in the image and in the likeness of God, that's all that God's going to do for you. I'm going to say that again. When you were created in the image and after the likeness of God, that's all that God is going to do for you. But you know what? That's all that you need. Because when you were made after the image and likeness of God, that means that you got everything that God is. You got 12 spiritual faculties to be able to work with. And those 12 spiritual faculties are enough to see you through anything that you may go through, regardless of what it looks like, how severe it is, or what may happen. And see, once we come to understand that with our relationship, our expectation of God becomes different. Because we know that we are God individualized. We are individual expressions of the Most High, walking around as Terry, as Sharon, as Shay, as Wendy, as everybody here. There is one universal divine mind that joins us all together. And what we need to do is we need to find that presence that's within us, that is our own unique expression of God, the Christ consciousness, and learn how to utilize and align ourselves with that. And then we'll be able to create the life that we desire to have. Now, if you're not creating the life that you want to have, it means that you're out of alignment. You're out of alignment with that Christ consciousness, with those spiritual faculties, and you're either not using them or you're misusing them. So we need to take time to spend time with ourselves, to commune with that inner presence in us, to talk with ourselves. And in talking to ourselves, we talk to divine mind, which is everywhere present. And the things that we need, the people that we need, the resources that we need will be drawn into our lives so that we can recognize and manifest the desires that we seek. Now, what I'd like for you to do is I'd like for you to consider the parable of the talents, because to me it really illustrates this. Most of the time when we hear this, we hear about making money and about becoming wealthy and using our talents, and that's a good interpretation. But I want you to take a little bit of a different look at it. Now, just to kind of recap it for those of you that may not remember exactly the story, there was a man who was getting ready to go on a long journey out of town, and he had some servants. So he chose 3 of his servants and entrusted his wealth to those 3. To one he gave 5 talents, to one he gave 2, and then another he gave 1. And to each he gave them according to their ability. And he said, here's the money, I'll see you when I get back, and he left. While he was gone, the first 2, those that got the 5 talents and the 2 talents, they took what they had got and they went out and they traded with it, and they doubled what they were given. But that third servant, the one who received the 1 talent, he got scared because his perception of his master was that he was a hard man, and that his master reaped what he didn't sow, and that he gathered what he did not scatter. So he took that talent, and he dug a hole in the ground, dropped the talent in, and covered it up, and waited till the master got back. So when the master got back, he called for an accounting. The first 2 said, you gave me 5, here's 5. You gave me 2, here's 2 more. But with that servant, he had excuses. He told the master that he was afraid, and he gave him back the thing that he had been given. The master said to him, well, if all these things are true, why didn't you at least give it to the bank, to the money lenders? And at least I would have gotten interest on the money. You know what? You got to go. And so we have this scripture, Matthew 25:29. For him who has, it shall be given, and it shall increase to him. But he who has not, even that which he has, shall be taken away from him. Sounds mean, doesn't it? Sounds kind of harsh. But let's take a step back and let's take a look at this story from a different perspective. The man, the master, is God. And what God has entrusted you is his wealth, a piece of who he is, your 12 spiritual faculties that God has given to you. It's not a question about whether you have the ability. It's not a question about whether you're worthy. God has given this to you anyway. It's not everything that God has, because God has more in store that God can give to you. But what God does is God gives you those 12 spiritual faculties, and then God takes a step back and leaves you alone to see what you're going to do with it. Now, we're told that the first 2 servants, they went out and they traded the talents. Now, we don't know what kind of obstacles that they ran into. Maybe they had people working for them that stole from them. Maybe they had lazy workers, or maybe everything went smooth. We don't know. All that we know is that they worked what they had to do. They worked their truth, and they doubled what was given to them. And see, when you work your truth, the extent of what you're given, you'll get that back. And when you do, you will come into the joy of spirit. You'll come into that flow where you're going to be told, wonderful servant, good and faithful servant, you've been faithful over a little. Now I'm going to make you faithful over more. There's more that you can do. But if instead you're like the third servant, that you become fearful, and you take your spiritual gifts and you bury them in the ground, you hide them, it's not that you're not capable. It's not that you're not worthy. It's that you're not applying yourself and using what it is that you have. And those spiritual faculties, like I said, they're just like a muscle. If you don't use it, you lose it. Some of you call yourselves old. You know, I don't call myself old. But those of you that say that you're getting up in years, you have those muscles that you haven't used for a while. And what happens when you try to use those muscles? They let you know that you haven't been using them. And it's the same thing with your spiritual faculties. You either use them or you lose them. But you don't completely lose them. They're there. They're just waiting for you to come along and to start to put them into practice. And you may get aches and pains while that's happening. But the thing that's beautiful about this, that this is something that can never be taken away from you. Because it's a part of who you are, what you are, as a spiritual being made in the image and likeness of God. And I know I've said that already, but it's important that we really get this because it goes back to the heart of what it is that I missed when we had this experience together, Reverend Sharon and I. I didn't understand that I was a spiritual being made in the image and likeness of God. I mean, I had been told it, I knew it, but I had not really internalized it, where I was living my life that way. So I had this experience, and I decided, I chose to take it a certain way. Reverend Sharon chose to take it differently. You see, each and every one of us are on a path. We're on a spiritual journey. Now, our journeys are different, but they all lead to one destination, and that's back to source, back to God. But depending on what each one of us need, our journeys, our paths are going to be different. Sometimes we're going to walk together, and our paths will converge. But after a time, it may be a few minutes, it may be years, those paths are going to diverge because the needs that our souls have are each different. Sometimes those paths are even going to go parallel to one another, where we've got similar experiences, but we experience them from a different perspective. And I think that's what happened with Reverend Sharon and me. We had the same experience, but we had different needs. So we drew something different out of those experiences. For me, I needed the experience to teach me that I needed to work with my faith, to exercise my faith, that my faith was weak. For Reverend Sharon, I think that she needed to know, I'm free. I'm free from pain. I'm free from physical limitation. And now I can be that wonderful, phenomenal, spiritual being that you created me to be. And she's done that, hasn't she? So at some point, after we've gone and we've used these faculties and we're on our path, we come to what's known as the Day of Judgment, that day of accounting. Now, in traditional Christianity, that Day of Judgment is when you die by and by, when God and the devil are going to have their fight and God's going to prevail. We don't teach that in New Thought. We teach that the Day of Judgment is today, tomorrow, yesterday, any day, any time. It's that moment in time where the results of what you've done come back to you. You see, again, God is principle, and God reflects back to us what we've been putting out. So our thoughts and our beliefs and our behaviors, we're accountable for them. It's not that God is testing us. It's not that God is punishing us. But God is principle, no respecter of any person. So if you don't like the results that you're getting, you need to do something different. So we're walking on our path, and sometimes we're going to come together and we're going to draw people into our lives that may be there for a moment, for a reason, for a season, or for a lifetime. And depending on what the needs that we have, we'll travel together, and sometimes we'll go on different paths and maybe come back together, or sometimes we go off in separate directions once each of us have gotten what we needed. And sometimes we will come and we will find the same people over and over again, but named as different people, because we didn't get the first time what we needed to get. So now, for those of you that have these relationships that you get into, where your relationships are abusive, or people don't treat you right, or they're not appreciating you and giving you what you need, don't hate the person, hate yourself. And don't hate yourself, I mean hate yourself, but hate that part of yourself, get rid of that part of yourself that is leaving you open to draw these kind of people into your lives. If you're constantly having financial problems, one after the other, it's a recurring experience. There's something on your path that you have not gotten that you need to get. And so that path is going to wind and turn around, and it's going to bring you right back to that same place. And you're going to continue to experience that same experience over and over on that path until you get it straight. You see, the thing is that for some of us, our paths are going to be long, and for other people, that path is short. For some people, their paths are direct. For some people, their paths wind and twist and turn. Some people's paths are hard, and some people's paths are easy. The kind of path that you're going to have is going to be up to you, because one path is not necessarily better than the other, but the path that you have is the one that's uniquely for you. It's the one that you need. It's the one that you created, and it's the one that God as principle is reflecting back to you. In taking a look at all this, it's made me take a look at myself and say, well, the problem really isn't with God, the problem is with me. And so I haven't been getting the results that I want. What is it that I need to do? The thing is that each and every one of us needs to spend time taking a look at ourselves, spending time with ourselves in communion with God in prayer and meditation, working with the visualization boards, whatever it is that we need to do to become, to create whatever it is that we need to be. We need to work with that. We need to stop looking outside of God to solve our problems, but know that we can trust God to lead us and to carry us wherever it is that we need to go. And that really was at the crux of it all. I did not trust God. I did not trust God to bring the right solution about because I was attached to a particular outcome. And isn't that what happens to us if we don't get things the way that we want them? We can't recognize it when we see it. And then we cut off the good that we could be getting. But I have to tell you, if you have faith, or rather if you use your faith, you'll leave yourself open for God to express through you and as you whatever way it is that you need to have it so that you can express and have the desires of your heart. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to close, and I'd like to read something that I know that each one of you is familiar with. It's a poem called Footsteps in the Sand. The man had a dream. He dreamed he was walking along the beach with the Lord, and across the dark sky flashed scenes from his life. For each scene, he noticed two sets of footprints in the sand, one belonging to him and the other to the Lord. When the last scene of his life flashed before him, he looked back at the footprints in the sand. He noticed that many times along the path of his life, there was only one set of footprints. He also noticed that this happened at the very lowest and the saddest times in his life. And this bothered him, and he questioned the Lord about it. Lord, you said that once I decided to follow you, you'd walk with me all the way. But I have noticed that during the most troublesome times in my life, that there were only one set of footprints. I don't understand why, when I needed you the most, that you deserted me. The Lord replied, my precious, precious child, I love you and would never leave you. During your times of trial and suffering, when you see only one set of footprints in the sand, it was then that I carried you. InSpirit family, trust in God, work your faith, and your faith will carry you to wherever you need to be. I love each and every one of you. Happy New Year.